My brothers laughed as they plotted to drain the family trust, convinced I was too stupid to notice their scheme. They didn't realize the account was locked and the only key was sitting quietly in my pocket. I sat at the far end of the mahogany conference table, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee I had poured for myself because no one else would offer me one. To my right sat Liam, the eldest, drumming his fingers on the leather armrest of his chair, looking at his Rolex every 30 seconds. To my left was Ethan, the middle child, currently scrolling through his phone and laughing at something likely inappropriate for a board meeting. And at the head of the table sat our father, looking tired but proud, gazing at his two sons as if they were the second coming of industry titans. They didn't look at me. They never looked at me. To them, I was Nevaeh Morris, the mistake, the accident, the dull girl who barely scraped through life while the Morris men conquered the world. I was the invisible fixture in the room, invited only out of a misplaced sense of obligation, or perhaps because they needed someone to take notes that they would later ignore. They were currently discussing the Morris Family Legacy Trust. It was a massive pool of generational wealth that my grandfather, Arthur Morris, had accumulated over 50 years of ruthless business deals and savvy investments. My father had inherited the company, but the liquid cash, the real power, was in that trust. Ethan tossed his phone onto the table and leaned back, a smirk plastered on his face. He said that once they accessed the funds, he was finally going to buy that summer home in the Hamptons he had been eyeing. Liam chimed in, saying he needed a few million to cover some bad bets he had made in the crypto market, though he phrased it as providing liquidity for a venture capital opportunity. They spoke about the money as if it were already in their pockets. They spoke about embezzlement, fraud, and theft with the casual tone one might use to discuss the weather. They were going to forge signatures. They were going to route the money through shell companies. They were going to bleed the legacy dry. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter. Ethan looked over at me, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he just remembered I was there. He asked me if I was writing this down. He told me to make sure I didn't include the illegal parts in the official minutes. He laughed, a cruel barking sound. He said I probably didn't even understand what they were talking about anyway. He called me a failure. He said I was lucky they let me sit inside fast food restaurants, let alone a high-end boardroom. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, typed a sentence on my laptop, and watched them. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea that every single penny they were coveting, every asset they were drooling over, had been under my sole control for the last 5 years. To understand how we got here, to this moment of absolute betrayal and impending ruin, you have to understand the dynamic of the Morris family. Growing up, there was a very clear hierarchy. At the top were my parents, king and queen of the Morris Empire. Below them were the princes, Liam and Ethan. And somewhere in the dirt, beneath the foundation of the castle, was me. I wasn't abused physically, not really. It was something more insidious. It was complete and utter emotional neglect coupled with psychological warfare. My brothers were the Bolden children. If Liam drew a stick figure, my mother framed it. If Ethan burped, my father applauded his vocal projection. They were groomed for greatness from the moment they took their first breaths. Private tutors, sports coaches, music lessons, Ivy League connections. They were told they were special, brilliant, and destined to rule. I was the afterthought. I was born 6 years after Ethan, a surprise pregnancy that my mother frequently referred to as a disruption. While the boys got tutors, I was told to figure it out myself. When I brought home an A on a report card, my father would glance at it and ask why I wasn't more like Liam, who had scored a touchdown the previous Friday. It didn't matter that Liam was failing math, he was a Morris man. The narrative was established early. The boys were geniuses, and Nevaeh was slow. Nevaeh was plain. Nevaeh was a failure. They repeated it so often that it became the family truth. If I made a valid point at dinner, I was told I didn't know what I was talking about. If I expressed an interest in the family business, I was laughed at and told to aim for something more realistic, like a cashier at a grocery store. But there was one person who didn't buy into the narrative: Grandfather Arthur. Arthur Morris was a terrifying man to most people. He was cold, calculating, and suffered no fools. My father was terrified of him. The boys were bored by him because he didn't give them toys, he gave them books they never read. When I was 12, I was hiding in the library during a Christmas party. The noise of the family fawning over Liam's new car, he was 16 and had just been gifted a Porsche, was too much for me. I was sitting on the floor, reading a book about forensic accounting. I know, not normal reading for a 12-year-old, but I was fascinated by where money went and how people hid it. Grandfather Arthur walked in. He leaned on his cane and looked down at me. He asked what I was reading. I showed him. I expected him to laugh, to tell me to go play with dolls. Instead, he sat down in the leather armchair next to me. He asked me to explain the chapter I was on, so I did. I explained the concept of layering in money laundering. I explained how shell companies worked. I remember the look in his eyes. It wasn't love, exactly. Arthur wasn't a loving man. It was respect. It was recognition. He saw something in me that my parents were too blinded by their golden sons to see. He saw his own mind. From that day on, I became his shadow. He told my parents he was taking me to the park or to the movies, but really, he was taking me to his office. He taught me everything. He taught me how to read a balance sheet, how to spot a lie in a financial report, how to leverage assets, and how to destroy a competitor without them ever knowing you were in the room. He forbade me from telling my parents or brothers. He said, and I will never forget this, that silence is the most expensive weapon in the world, and I should never give it away for free. He told me to let them think I was stupid. He told me to play the role of the failure. So I did. Throughout high school, I purposely kept my grades just average enough to not draw attention, while privately, I was devouring university-level economic theory. When it came time for college, my parents refused to pay for a university. They said it would be a waste of money for someone with my limited capabilities. They sent the boys to expensive private colleges, which they nearly flunked out of, and told me to get a job. I enrolled in community college, paying for it myself by doing bookkeeping for small businesses under a pseudonym. But the real education continued with grandfather Arthur. 5 years ago, Arthur's health began to decline rapidly. The vultures started circling. My father, Liam, and Ethan were practically measuring the drapes in his estate while he was still lying in the hospital bed. They were giddy with anticipation. They knew Arthur was worth hundreds of millions, and they couldn't wait to get their hands on it. 2 days before he died, Arthur called me into his room. He kicked everyone else out. He handed me a thick envelope and a heavy iron key. He told me that he had restructured everything. He knew my father was weak and that my brothers were greedy and incompetent. He knew that if he left the money to them directly, the legacy he built would be gone in a decade. He had created the Morris Family Legacy Trust. It was an irrevocable trust with a complex structure that made it virtually impenetrable. On paper, it looked like the family had access. It looked like a standard trust fund. But the fine print, the clauses buried deep in the legal jargon that my lazy brothers would never read, stated that the trust had a sole trustee and a sole beneficiary who had absolute veto power over all disbursements. Me. I was the trustee. I was the beneficiary. He left the operating company to my father, knowing Dad would eventually hand it to the boys. He left them the houses, the cars, the shiny objects. But the war chest, the accumulated capital of 50 years, he left that to the failure. His last words to me were, "Wait until they show you who they really are. Then close the fist." I wept when he died. Not just because I lost my mentor, but because I was now alone in a house full of wolves, holding the leash but unable to pull it yet. For the last 5 years, I watched. I watched my father retire and hand the CEO title to Liam. I watched Liam hire Ethan as the CFO, a man who thought EBITDA was a Greek island. I watched them run the company into the ground. They made horrific business decisions. They bought companies that were worthless because the CEOs were their drinking buddies. They ignored market trends. They alienated loyal staff. And all the while, they drained the company accounts to fund their lavish lifestyles. I worked as a secretary in the office. They insisted on it. They said they were doing me a favor by employing me because no one else would hire me. I fetched their coffee, I filed their papers, and I listened. I saw the balance sheets. I knew the company was hemorrhaging money. I knew they were months away from insolvency. That brings us back to the boardroom. The day of reckoning. My father had called this emergency meeting because the company couldn't make payroll. The banks had cut off their lines of credit. They were desperate. So, Liam said, leaning forward, the plan is simple. We access the legacy trust. We transfer $50 million into the operating account to cover the debts and payroll, and we take another $20 million each as a retention bonus for steering the ship through these hard times. I almost choked on my coffee. Retention bonus for steering the ship into an iceberg? Dad, Ethan said, do we have the access codes? My father nodded. I have the old ledger Arthur left. The account numbers are there. We just need to go to the bank and authorize the transfer. As the direct descendants, it shouldn't be an issue. And what about the legal side? Liam asked, glancing at me with disdain. Nevaeh, stop typing so loud. You're giving me a headache. I stopped typing. Sorry, Liam, just capturing your brilliance. He sneered. Whatever. Dad, we need to move fast. If the shareholders find out we're broke, stock plunges. We'll go now, Father said, standing up. Nevaeh, call the car. And you're coming with us. Why? I asked. Because I need someone to carry the files, Ethan laughed. And because we need a witness for the notary, and you're the only one dumb enough to sign whatever we put in front of you without asking questions. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. Of course, anything to help the family. The drive to the First National Bank was tense. The brothers were already spending the money in their heads. They were looking up exotic cars on their phones. My father was staring out the window, looking stressed but hopeful. We arrived at the bank and were ushered into the private wealth management suite. Mr. Henderson, the senior banker who had managed my grandfather's accounts for decades, was waiting for us. Mr. Henderson was a man of integrity. He was also the only other person on earth who knew the truth about the trust. When we walked in, he greeted my father and brothers politely, but when his eyes met mine, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We sat down. My father placed the old ledger on the table. Mr. Henderson, my father began, using his blustering CEO voice, we are here to make a withdrawal from the Morris Family Legacy Trust, a significant one. Mr. Henderson folded his hands on the desk. I see. And you have the authorization? I am Arthur Morris's son, my father spat. These are his grandsons. We are the authorization. I understand that, sir, Mr. Henderson said calmly. However, the trust is structured uniquely. It requires the authorization of the trustee for any movement of funds. I am the trustee, my father shouted. I'm his heir. Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. I'm afraid that is incorrect. Your father appointed a specific trustee before his passing. The bank cannot release a single cent without that person's biometric approval and physical key. The room went silent. Liam looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Dad. Who is it? Liam demanded. Who did the old man put in charge? Was it his lawyer? We'll fire him. We'll sue him. It's not a lawyer, Mr. Henderson said. He looked uncomfortable, acting his part perfectly. The trustee is a family member. Well, it's obviously one of us, Ethan yelled. Is it me? Did he pick me? I was sitting in the corner chair, the failure chair, holding the heavy briefcase filled with their useless documents. I decided it was time. I stood up. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor was the only noise in the room. I walked over to the empty chair directly across from Mr. Henderson, the seat of power, and sat down. Nevaeh, what the hell are you doing? Liam snapped. Get up. That's for the trustee. I know, I said. My voice was different now. It wasn't the soft, apologetic voice of the sister they bullied. It was the voice of Arthur Morris. Cold, direct. That's why I'm sitting here. My father looked at me, his face twisting in confusion. Nevaeh, get back in the corner. You're embarrassing us. I ignored him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy iron key my grandfather had given me. I placed it on the desk with a heavy thud. Mr. Henderson, I said clearly, I'd like to review the access logs for the trust. I believe there has been an attempted unauthorized access. Mr. Henderson smiled. Certainly, Ms. Morris. He turned his screen toward me. The silence in the room was deafening. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out. "This is a joke," Ethan whispered. "Dad, tell her to stop playing." "It's not a joke," I said, not looking at them. I was scrolling through the account summary. Grandfather left the trust to me, sole beneficiary, sole trustee, irrevocable. "You?" Liam laughed, but it sounded hysterical. "You? The failure? The girl who couldn't even get into state college? You think you control the money?" "I didn't go to state college because I was busy managing a $300 million portfolio while you were doing keg stands, Liam," I said, finally looking him in the eye. "And regarding the failure label, I've grown that portfolio by 18% annually for the last 5 years. Meanwhile, you three have lost 40% of the operating company's value in 2 years." My father turned purple. You stole it. You manipulated a dying old man." "I didn't manipulate anyone," I replied. "He saw you. He saw all of you. He knew you were greedy, lazy, and entitled. He knew you would destroy his legacy, so he gave it to the only person who actually cared about the work, not the reward." "Give me the key." Liam lunged across the table. Mr. Henderson pressed a button under his desk. 2 large security guards stepped into the room instantly. Liam froze. "Sit down," I commanded, and for the first time in his life, my big brother sat down when I told him to. "Now," I said, clasping my hands together, "here is the situation. The company is bankrupt. You have no liquidity, your credit lines are frozen, and I just flagged the corporate accounts for audit because I know you've been using them to pay for your personal expenses." "You can't do that," Ethan squeaked. "We're family." "Family?" I raised an eyebrow. "Family is what you called me when you needed a punching bag. Family is what you used to justify treating me like a servant for 20 years. When did you ever treat me like family, Ethan? Was it when you forgot to pick me up from surgery because you were at a party? Was it when you told your friends I was adopted because you were ashamed of me?" He looked down, his face pale. "Here is what is going to happen," I continued. "I am freezing the trust. Not a dime goes out. The operating company will file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It will be restructured. Management will be removed." "Removed?" my father whispered. "I'm the chairman." "Not anymore," I said. "As the primary creditor holding the debt, yes, I bought your debt 6 months ago through a holding company. I am removing the board. You're fired, Dad. Liam, you're fired. Ethan, you're definitely fired." "You can't do this to us." My mother's voice would have shrieked if she were there, but my father channeled her perfectly. "We are your blood. We raised you." "You housed me," I corrected. "You didn't raise me. You tolerated me." I turned to Mr. Henderson. "Please freeze their personal accounts as well. I believe the loans for their homes and cars are cross-collateralized with the company assets, which are now in default." "Done," Mr. Henderson said, typing rapidly. "Wait!" Liam was crying now, actual tears. "Nevaeh, please. I have a mortgage. I have car payments. My wife, she'll leave me if the money is gone." "Then she doesn't love you, Liam," I said coldly. "She loves the money, and since you don't have the money, you're about to find out who really cares about you, just like I had to find out that none of you cared about me." I stood up and took the key back. "I'm done here." I walked toward the door. My father was slumped in his chair, looking like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Ethan was staring at his phone, probably seeing transaction declined notifications popping up. Liam was sobbing into his hands. "Nevaeh," my father called out, his voice cracking. "Where are you going? How are we supposed to live?" I stopped at the door and turned back. "I hear the grocery store is hiring cashiers. It's honest work. You should try it." I walked out of the bank and into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel like the disappointment. I felt light. The fallout was spectacular. The news hit the business journals the next day. The Morris empire had collapsed, but a new entity had risen from the ashes, controlled by the mysterious granddaughter. My brothers lost everything. The bank repossessed Liam's Porsche and Ethan's summer home deposit. My parents had to sell the estate to cover their debts. They moved into a small 2-bedroom condo in a less desirable part of town. They tried to sue me, of course. They hired a lawyer on contingency who thought it was an easy win. But Grandfather Arthur's trust was ironclad. Mr. Henderson and the team of attorneys I had retained destroyed them in court. The judge actually scolded them for bringing a frivolous lawsuit and ordered them to pay my legal fees, which, naturally, they couldn't afford. I didn't leave them on the street, though. I'm not a monster. I set up a small stipend for my parents. It's enough to pay for rent, food, and basic utilities. Nothing more. No country clubs, no first-class travel, no designer clothes. They have to live like average people. For them, it is a fate worse than death. As for my brothers, I offered them jobs. I bought a small chain of car washes as an investment. I offered them positions as managers. Not owners, managers. They have to wear uniforms. They have to scrub tires when it's busy. They have to answer to a regional director who reports to me. Liam refused. He's currently trying to become a lifestyle influencer on social media, but it's hard to influence people when you're living on your friend's couch. Ethan took the job. I stopped by the car wash last week. I sat in my car, a vintage Mercedes that used to belong to Grandfather Arthur, and watched Ethan wiping down the rims of a minivan. He looked up and saw me. For a moment, I thought he would come over and scream. I thought he would throw the rag at me, but he didn't. He just looked at me with a mixture of shame and fear. He nodded his head, just once, and went back to scrubbing. I rolled up my window and drove away. They called me a failure for 25 years. They told me I was worthless. They told me I would never amount to anything. Now I sit in Grandfather's office, running the family fortune, growing the legacy he trusted me with. I am Nevaeh Morris. I am the trustee. I am the one who holds the key. And it turns out, I wasn't the failure. I was the failsafe. The silence in my life now isn't the silence of being ignored. It's the silence of peace. It's the silence of knowing that I won. And every time I check my bank account, I remember the look on their faces when the access denied screen popped up. It's a memory worth more than all the money in the trust. But the money is pretty nice too.